The little girl sat on the park bench, gently brushing her doll's hair and whispering softly, "There you go, Lily. You look beautiful today." Her voice carried across the quiet morning air, reaching the ears of a well-dressed man who stopped, dead in his tracks. Richard Blackwood, one of the wealthiest real estate developers in Chicago, felt his heart skip a beat at the sound of that name. It had been 5 years since he'd heard anyone say Lily with such tenderness. 5 years since his own daughter had disappeared without a trace after his bitter divorce. The police had searched extensively, but the case had gone cold, leaving Richard with nothing but memories and a hole in his heart that nothing could fill. He turned slowly, eyes landing on the child. She couldn't be more than 7 years old, with dark curls framing a face that seemed hauntingly familiar, despite being obviously different from his blonde Lily. Something about the girl's mannerisms, the way she tilted her head while speaking to the doll, sent shivers down his spine. "Who taught you that name?" Richard asked, before he could stop himself, his voice cracking with emotion as he approached the bench. The girl looked up, startled by the stranger's intensity, clutching her doll protectively against her worn coat. Her eyes, large and intelligent, studied him with a wariness that spoke of lessons learned too young. Behind her, an elderly woman, sitting on the adjacent bench, straightened up, watchful and concerned. "I'm sorry," Richard said, attempting to soften his approach as he noticed the fear in the child's eyes. "Your doll has the same name as someone very special to me." He maintained a respectful distance, aware of how inappropriate his sudden interest might seem. The girl's guardian, presumably her grandmother, moved closer, placing a protective hand on the child's shoulder. Richard noticed their clothes, clean but unmistakably worn, and the paper bag lunch beside them that seemed meager for 2 people. "My mommy named her," the girl finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "She said it was a beautiful name for beautiful things." She stroked the doll's faded dress, revealing a small birthmark on her wrist as her sleeve slid up. A crescent-shaped mark identical to the one his daughter had been born with. Richard froze, his breath catching in his throat as the world seemed to tilt beneath his feet. It couldn't be possible. The odds were astronomical. Yet he couldn't tear his eyes away from that distinctive mark. His ex-wife had disappeared after their divorce, taking their 3-year-old daughter and vanishing despite court orders and private investigators. He'd spent millions searching, hired the best detectives in the country, but they'd found nothing. 5 years of emptiness, of returning to an echoing mansion filled with toys never played with and rooms never occupied. 5 years of wondering if his little girl was even alive. If you're touched by this story already, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming real-life stories that will restore your faith in humanity. Drop a comment telling us if you've ever experienced an unexpected reunion that changed your life. We love hearing your stories. Now let's continue with this emotional journey that will show how a simple moment in a park changed multiple lives forever. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, bringing people together through the smallest coincidences that turn out to be life-altering moments of fate. What happened next would test Richard's composure and challenge everything he thought he knew about his past, present, and future. "Is your mother here?" Richard asked carefully, trying to keep his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The elderly woman stepped forward, her posture defensive. "I'm Isabella's guardian," she stated firmly. "Her mother passed away 3 months ago." The information hit Richard like a physical blow. If this child was who he was beginning to suspect, she might be. Then that meant his ex-wife was dead, and their daughter had been living in what appeared to be difficult circumstances. He introduced himself properly, explaining that he was looking for his daughter, who had been taken by his ex-wife years ago. "My Lily would be 8 now," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She had a crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist, just like your Isabella." The older woman's face paled visibly, her hand trembling as she reached for the bench to steady herself. "Marie never spoke of a father," she said cautiously. She came to our building 5 years ago, said she was escaping something bad. She worked 2 jobs, loved Isabella fiercely. The woman, who introduced herself as Martha, explained that Marie had made her promise to care for Isabella if anything happened to her. Before she died of pneumonia, we couldn't afford proper treatment. She gave Isabella that doll and told her it was named after someone special from before. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she recounted how they'd been struggling since Marie's death, facing possible eviction from their small apartment. Richard felt his chest tighten with a complex mixture of grief for his ex-wife, anger at the years stolen from him, and overwhelming hope that this child might be his Lily, now called Isabella. He asked permission to talk more, to understand the situation better, and Martha hesitantly agreed. They moved to a nearby cafe where Richard bought them a proper meal, noting how Isabella carefully saved half her sandwich in a napkin. For later, she explained when she caught him watching, and the simple act of pragmatic poverty broke something inside him. As they talked, details emerged that aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. Marie Jenkins had been his ex-wife's maiden name. Isabella's birthday matched Lily's, and Martha confirmed that Marie had mentioned fleeing from a controlling relationship in Chicago. Richard was careful not to overwhelm Isabella, asking gentle questions about her life, her school, her interests. He discovered she loved drawing, just as Lily had, and was struggling in math. She attended a public school when Martha could manage to get her there, but often missed days when bus fare was too expensive or when Martha's arthritis was particularly bad. Martha shared that Marie had been paranoid about being found, always looking over her shoulder, moving apartments twice in the first year, before settling in their current building when money became too tight. She never said exactly what she was running from, but she was terrified, Martha explained, as Isabella colored with crayons Richard had purchased from a nearby store. She'd wake up screaming sometimes. The information puzzled Richard. Their divorce had been contentious, certainly, but nothing that would justify such fear. He had been heartbroken, angry about losing custody, but never violent or threatening. As they talked, Richard began to suspect that someone else might have scared Marie. Perhaps someone she'd met after leaving him. The way Martha described, Marie's fear seemed inconsistent with anything in their relationship, even at its worst. Richard wondered if Marie had been running from someone else entirely, someone who had made her believe that disappearing with Isabella was her only option. "Would you allow me to arrange for a DNA test?" Richard finally asked Martha, keeping his voice low so Isabella wouldn't hear. "If she is my daughter, I've missed 5 years of her life. I don't want to miss any more." Martha studied him carefully, noting his expensive watch, tailored suit, and the genuine pain in his eyes. "You seem like a good man," she said cautiously, but Marie was terrified for a reason. "Before I agree to anything, I need to understand what really happened." Richard nodded, respecting her protective instinct. He explained the divorce, the custody battle, his frantic search when they disappeared. "I never stopped looking," he said, his voice breaking. "I have her room exactly as it was, her favorite stuffed elephant still on her bed. Every birthday I buy her a present and put it in her closet, hoping someday she'll open them." Martha's eyes softened at this, seeing the raw grief of a father who had lost his child, not the monster Marie had seemingly been running from. 2 days later, with Martha's cautious permission and a lawyer present to protect Isabella's interests, the DNA test was performed. Richard arranged for Martha's apartment rent to be paid while they awaited results, also ensuring they had proper groceries and necessities. He didn't want to overwhelm Isabella with sudden changes or expectations, instead visiting daily to slowly build a relationship, bringing small gifts and spending time helping with her homework. During these visits, he learned more about Marie's final years, her determination to provide for her daughter despite limited education and resources, working as a waitress during the day and cleaning offices at night. The picture that emerged was of a woman who had loved her daughter fiercely, but had been operating under some profound fear. Richard hired a private investigator to look into Marie's life during those missing years, wondering if understanding her fear might help heal the wounds her disappearance had created. When the DNA test results arrived a week later, they confirmed what Richard had already come to believe in his heart. Isabella was indeed his daughter, Lily. The emotions that flooded through him were overwhelming. Joy mixed with sorrow for the lost years, relief tangled with anger at whatever circumstances had led to this separation. With Martha present, he gently explained to Isabella that he was her father, showing her photographs of when she was a baby in his arms. "Your mommy called you Lily then," he explained softly. "That's why your doll has that name." Isabella processed this information with the remarkable resilience of childhood, asking thoughtful questions about why her mother had never told her about him. Richard was careful not to speak ill of Marie, explaining simply that grown-ups sometimes make mistakes when they're scared. Martha watched this interaction carefully, still protective but increasingly convinced that Richard truly had Isabella's best interests at heart. The transition was handled with care and professional guidance. Richard arranged for both Isabella and Martha to move into his home, understanding that separating Isabella from the only other person she trusted would be traumatic. He converted a guest suite for Martha, ensuring she understood she would always have a place in Isabella's life. The private investigator discovered something unexpected: threatening letters Marie had received shortly after the divorce from someone claiming to be associated with Richard, vowing to make her pay for taking his child. These letters, found in a lockbox in Marie's former apartment, helped explain her terror and disappearance. Richard was horrified, immediately suspecting his former business partner, who had always been inappropriately invested in Richard's personal life. This discovery led to a criminal investigation, but more importantly, it helped Richard understand Marie's actions without bitterness. She hadn't been trying to hurt him. She had been trying to protect their daughter from what she believed was a serious threat. The mansion that had felt empty for years gradually filled with life again. Isabella's laughter echoed through the halls as she explored her new home, discovering the room that had been waiting for her all this time. The wall of wrapped birthday presents moved her to tears, tangible proof that she had been loved and missed during those years of absence. Richard enrolled her in a good school, arranged for therapy to help her process the changes, and made sure Martha was comfortable in her new role as part of their family. Isabella kept the name she had grown up with, though she understood now why her father sometimes called her Lily when he was emotional. The doll that had led to their reunion was placed in a special display case in her room, a reminder of how a simple coincidence in a park had changed everything. Richard often found himself standing in her doorway at night, watching her sleep, still hardly able to believe that the universe had somehow returned his daughter to him. The private investigator's findings led to charges against Thomas Wilkins, Richard's former business partner, who had apparently become obsessed with punishing Marie after she rejected his advances during the divorce proceedings. Evidence suggested he had sent the threatening letters and possibly even hired someone to frighten her, though he denied this. Thomas had apparently convinced Marie that Richard was behind the threats, exploiting her vulnerability during the contentious divorce. The betrayal cut deep for Richard, who had trusted Thomas for years in business matters. The investigation revealed that Thomas had also actively sabotaged Richard's efforts to find Marie and Isabella, using his access to company resources to mislead private detectives and create false leads. This discovery helped Richard finally understand why even his most extensive search efforts had failed so completely. The truth brought closure, though not without bringing fresh pain at the realization of how thoroughly they had all been manipulated. With professional guidance, Richard gradually shared age-appropriate versions of these discoveries with Isabella, helping her understand that her mother had loved her deeply and had believed she was protecting her. "Your mommy was very brave," he told her one evening as they looked through photographs of Marie that Martha had saved. "She did everything she could to keep you safe." Isabella processed this information with remarkable maturity, asking thoughtful questions and expressing sadness that her mother and father hadn't been able to talk to each other directly. "Maybe if you had talked, you could have figured it out together," she observed with the simple wisdom of childhood. Richard could only agree. The lesson of communication not lost on him. He established a college fund in Marie's name and made donations to pneumonia research and treatment programs for low-income families, determined that some good should come from the tragedy of her preventable death. Martha became an unexpected blessing in their lives, her practical wisdom and unconditional love for Isabella providing stability during the transition. Richard arranged for the best medical care for her arthritis and other health issues, grateful, beyond words, for the woman who had stepped in when his daughter needed someone. Martha shared stories about the years he had missed, Isabella's first day of school, her determination to learn to read early, her habit of leaving notes for her exhausted mother to find when she returned from night shifts. These stories were bittersweet for Richard, painful in their reminder of what he had lost, but precious as connections to the years that would otherwise remain blank in his understanding of his daughter. Over time, he came to see that while he couldn't reclaim those lost years, he could ensure that every day going forward was filled with the love and security Isabella deserved. The pain of separation gradually transformed into gratitude for reunion, though he never stopped wishing that Marie could have known the truth in time. The story of their reunion eventually made local news, partly because of the criminal case against Thomas, but mostly because of the remarkable coincidence that had brought them together. Richard was careful to protect Isabella from too much public attention, declining most interview requests and ensuring her privacy was maintained at school. The experience changed him profoundly, shifting his priorities from business expansion to family and philanthropy. He established a foundation to help single parents in crisis situations, particularly those dealing with domestic threats or financial emergencies. The foundation provided legal assistance, safe housing, and medical care, addressing the very issues that had made Marie's situation so desperate. Isabella, despite her young age, took pride in helping select recipients for special grants, showing a compassion and empathy beyond her years. "Mom would like this," she said once as they reviewed applications together. "She always helped people, even when we didn't have much." As months passed, Isabella flourished in her new environment, though not without occasional struggles and questions. She sometimes had nightmares about losing her father again, or worried that she might somehow forget her mother. Richard and Martha worked together to keep Marie's memory alive in positive ways, celebrating her birthday and creating a memory book of stories and photographs. Richard made sure Isabella understood that loving him didn't mean betraying her mother's memory. "Your mother gave you life twice," he told her. "Once when you were born, and again when she protected you all those years." This perspective helped Isabella integrate her past with her present, understanding that both her parents had loved her in their own ways. The therapist noted that Isabella was developing remarkable emotional resilience, able to process complex feelings about her unusual family history. Richard watched in awe as his daughter navigated challenges that would overwhelm many adults, her innate strength reminding him daily of the little girl he had known and the remarkable young woman she was becoming. For Richard, the journey brought unexpected healing. The rage and bitterness that had festered during those years of searching gradually dissolved as he came to understand the full picture of what had happened. He could now look at photographs of Marie without anger, recognizing that she too had been a victim of manipulation and fear. In quiet moments, he sometimes spoke to her memory, telling her about Isabella's accomplishments and promising to give their daughter the life she deserved. The greatest gift in Richard's transformation was his newfound ability to be truly present with Isabella, no longer haunted by the ghost of loss that had previously defined him. He learned to coach her soccer team, help with science projects, and simply sit alongside her while she read, treasuring ordinary moments that once seemed impossibly out of reach. The mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum to his grief became a home again, filled with the comfortable chaos of family life. The first anniversary of their reunion brought a special celebration, with Richard, Isabella and Martha, planting a cherry tree in the garden to symbolize their new beginning. Isabella insisted on hanging a small picture of her mother in a weatherproof frame among the branches so Mom can watch it grow too. This thoughtful gesture touched both adults deeply, recognizing the wisdom in Isabella's instinctive understanding that healing didn't require forgetting. As they stood around the freshly planted tree, Richard reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. How a chance encounter in a park, a doll's name, and a distinctive birthmark had reunited a father and daughter after years of separation. Life had taught him that family could be lost and found in unexpected ways, that healing could come from the most unlikely sources, and that love could transcend even the most painful of circumstances. The cherry tree would blossom each spring, a reminder that even after the darkest winters, renewal was always possible. One evening, as Richard was tucking Isabella into bed, she asked a question that had clearly been on her mind for some time. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "do you think Mom knew you were looking for us?" The question caught him off guard, stirring emotions he was still learning to navigate. He sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "I believe your mom thought she was protecting you from danger," he replied honestly. "She didn't know the truth about who was really threatening her." Isabella considered this, her young face serious in the soft lamplight. "I wish she could know now," she said finally. "I wish she could see that you're not scary at all." Richard smiled at this, touched by her assessment. "I wish that too, sweetheart," he said softly. "But I think maybe, somehow, she does know." This thought seemed to comfort Isabella, who drifted off to sleep, clutching both her lily doll and the stuffed elephant Richard had kept for her all those years. As Isabella integrated into her new life, Richard was continually amazed by her resilience and adaptability. She excelled in school once given proper resources and support, showing particular talent in art and creative writing. Her teachers noted her unusual empathy for classmates facing difficulties, how she would include the excluded and defend the bullied without hesitation. Richard recognized that these qualities had likely been nurtured during her years of modest living with Marie and Martha, where she had learned firsthand about struggle and kindness. He was humbled by the realization that while he could provide material advantages his daughter had previously lacked, Marie had given her something equally valuable, a compassionate heart, and an understanding of human vulnerability. This recognition helped him honor Marie's memory, not just out of obligation, but with genuine appreciation for her role in shaping the remarkable child they had created together. Martha, who had initially planned to stay only until Isabella had adjusted, became a permanent and beloved member of their household. Her practical wisdom and no-nonsense approach to life balanced Richard's tendency toward indulgence, creating a healthy dynamic that benefited Isabella tremendously. "A child needs both roots and wings," Martha would say when Richard worried about setting appropriate boundaries. Her presence helped maintain a connection to Isabella's years with Marie, providing continuity during what could have otherwise been a jarring transition. Richard came to value Martha not just for Isabella's sake, but as a friend and advisor in her own right. He arranged for her sister and nieces to visit regularly, expanding their family circle even further. The mansion that had once echoed with Richard's solitary footsteps now regularly hosted Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, and impromptu movie nights, filled with the comfortable chaos of multi-generational family life. The legal proceedings against Thomas Wilkins concluded with a plea deal that included significant financial restitution and a restraining order. Richard chose not to discuss the details with Isabella beyond what was necessary for her understanding of past events, preferring to focus on building their future rather than dwelling on betrayal. The foundation he established continued to grow, eventually partnering with domestic violence shelters and legal aid organizations across the state. Isabella, despite her young age, became increasingly involved as she grew older, sitting in on appropriate meetings and offering her perspective on how to help children in situations similar to what she had experienced. Kids know when adults are afraid, she observed once during a foundation meeting. They need someone to explain what's happening in words they can understand. Her insights, born from personal experience, helped shape programs that would eventually support thousands of families in crisis situations. Healing came in unexpected moments. When Isabella laughed with the same uninhibited joy Richard remembered from her toddler years. When she asked questions about family history that connected her to grandparents and relatives she was only now getting to know. When she confidently navigated social situations that would have been impossible in her previously isolated life. There were challenges too, occasional tantrums or fears that seemed to emerge from nowhere, night terrors that sent Richard rushing to her room, moments of grief for her mother that could be triggered by something as simple as a song or a familiar scent. The family therapist assured Richard that such reactions were normal and healthy, signs that Isabella was processing complex emotions rather than suppressing them. She trusts you enough to fall apart sometimes, the therapist explained. That's a gift, not a problem. Richard took these words to heart, learning to provide steady support during emotional storms rather than attempting to shield her from necessary pain. 5 years after their remarkable reunion, Richard and Isabella stood together at Marie's grave on what would have been her birthday. It had become an annual tradition, a quiet day of remembrance, where they would bring flowers, and Isabella would share her experiences from the past year, so Mom can keep up with everything. Richard had purchased the plot and headstone after learning that Marie had been buried in a modest grave with only a small marker. The new memorial, elegant but not ostentatious, included the inscription, "Beloved Mother who protected fiercely," words Isabella had chosen herself. As they stood there together, now comfortable in the silence that came with shared grief, Richard noticed something that took his breath away. Isabella, now 13, had begun to resemble Marie in subtle ways, certain expressions, the tilt of her head when considering something important, the determined set of her jaw when she felt strongly about an issue. Seeing these echoes of Marie and their daughter brought not pain, but a profound sense of continuity and rightness. "Dad," Isabella said as they walked back to the car, her hand still comfortably in his despite her increasing independence. "I've been thinking about something important." Richard nodded encouragingly, always moved by the thoughtful way she approached significant topics. "I want to start a scholarship in Mom's name," she continued, "for kids whose parents are sick but can't afford doctors, so other kids don't lose their moms like I did." The suggestion, so perfectly aligned with both Marie's circumstances and Isabella's developing sense of social justice, brought tears to Richard's eyes. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be very proud of who you're becoming." Isabella smiled up at him, her expression reflecting both the little girl he had lost and the young woman she was growing into. "I think she'd be happy that we found each other again," she said simply, "and that we're helping other people who are scared and alone like we were." As they drove home, Richard reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. A chance encounter in a park, a doll named Lily, a distinctive birthmark, such small things to have reconstructed an entire world. He thought about the parallel lives they had lived during those years of separation. He, in his mansion, filled with unspoken grief, Marie and Isabella in their modest apartment filled with love despite its limitations. He thought about Thomas's betrayal and the waste of years that could never be reclaimed. But mostly, he thought about the remarkable resilience of the human heart, how Isabella had somehow integrated both her past and present into a coherent sense of self, how Martha had opened her heart to include him in the family she had formed with Marie and Isabella, how he himself had learned to hold both grief and joy in the same moment without being consumed by either. These reflections weren't painful anymore, just part of the complex tapestry that made up their shared story. That evening, as they gathered for dinner with Martha and her visiting sister, Richard looked around the table and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Their family didn't fit any conventional definition. Not quite nuclear, not quite blended, not quite traditional. Yet it functioned with a harmony born of shared purpose and mutual respect. Isabella, animated as she described her latest school project, moved seamlessly between calling him Dad and referring to Martha with the same easy affection she might give a grandmother. There was always an empty chair at these gatherings, an unspoken acknowledgement of Marie's absence, yet her influence remained in the values they shared and the stories they told. Richard had long since realized that finding Isabella hadn't simply filled the hole in his life. It had reconstructed his entire understanding of what family could be. The journey had taught him that love wasn't a finite resource to be hoarded or controlled, but an expanding force that created space for everyone, who contributed to his daughter's well-being.